Hello there. My name is Tracy and I want to thank you for joining me. There have been some requests to put together how I create my whimsical girls, and I thought I would finally put a video together for you. Let me start by saying that I am using a 9 by 12 inch cold pressed watercolor paper. This brand happens to be Arches, which is 100% cotton. I like to use 100% cotton because it just works better when you are using watercolors. So I am showing you here how I create a face, and it is not the typical way, or probably a person who is trained through school. It is probably not their way of doing so, but this is what works for me, so I'm sharing it. I started with my eyes. Eyes are generally about an inch big, at least that's the way I make them on this paper, and they have about an inch and a half between them. I just start with the top curve of the eyes, and then I go directly to the nose. I am trying to just outline where I'm going to be putting each of the features for the face. What I have done for the nose is I come down approximately an eye length, so approximately an inch, sometimes a little bit more. It just depends on the shape of the face that I'm making, but here I'm doing approximately the same distance as the eye size. I create kind of like a little face. I put a smiley for the bottom of the nose, so just a little curved up line. And then right above it, I make a couple of eyes on the outside of that line. So those will be the nostrils. Then I use parentheses and I put those on the ends of the nostrils. That is my simple, or very simplistic nose. When I'm drawing the mouth, I go down again, I determine differently on every girl. But on this one, it's probably about a quarter of an inch, maybe a little bit more. And I start making the upper lip. Then I put the bottom of the upper lip in there. And then I add the bottom lip here. Something I want you to notice is that I erase a lot. I don't see well. Depending on the type of paper that you use, Arches, for me anyway, doesn't seem to have a problem with erasing. I am using a Vanish eraser. You can get those at Jerry's Autorama. It is the best eraser that I have found to completely erase without ruining the paper. Once I have the mouth in place, I go to the bottom of the eyes. I go back and forth, I should tell you that. But I go to the bottom of the eyes and I kind of just guess. I'm like, okay, where are the bottom of the eyes? Then I need the inner corner of the eyes. Where is that going to be? I make my little loop there. I like to call these my little lemons. I feel like the eyes, before you put the iris and everything in it, looks like a lemon. I want to explain that when I use an eraser, I use a Vanish eraser that I purchased at Jerry's Autorama. It seems to be the one that erases the best on watercolor paper without ruining the paper. I also use a mechanical pencil, and this is either a 4H or an HB, and I use it because I feel I can get a better point on it. I don't particularly like the ones that come in a regular pencil style, but that's just my preference. However, when I do any type of sketch work, I enjoy the regular pencils. So it just depends on what I'm drawing on, I guess. Once I have created the outside of the eyes, I go in and I draw a circle that would represent the iris, and then inside that, a circle that represents the pupil. Now the iris is, for me, going to take up most of the eye because I like large irises. You want to make sure that you either don't see the bottom of the iris or you see very little of it, and you definitely almost never see the top of it unless you're doing a wide-eyed expression. The pupil goes up approximately halfway on the eye, and then you just make it even across the iris. And you can decide whether or not you want a large pupil or a small pupil. Don't forget the crease above the eye, which you notice I put in there. And now I've gone to readjusting the mouth. The mouth to me is always probably the second hardest thing to do. I'm not sure why, but I just constantly struggle with the mouths. I erase a lot. I will create lines and then change them to curves. This helps me in guiding. With visual impairment, it's difficult sometimes to connect all my lines, so I have to draw them. Here I am putting in some eyebrows. I guess on this one, I'm not going to lie, I don't have any rhyme or reason, and there is a rhyme or reason. I'm not going to go into it. You can look up the way to draw a face, and there are tons of guidelines out there. I guess it's probably because of my visual impairment that I just hate looking at guidelines. It's difficult for me to see, so I just do it the way I can do it. Once I put the eyebrows in, what I'm doing is just giving myself a chin line. I try and draw a straight line at the bottom of the chin that aligns with the lips. And you'll notice that I have aligned the nose to the middle of the face, so right between the eyes. I find the center point and I just drag it down, and that's where I put my little upturned U for the bottom of the nose. And underneath that, I put the little divot in the upper lip, and then of course then there's the chin. Here you'll see that I am putting in lines more so than curves for my face structure, my cheek structure, but now I'm erasing them and kind of drawing over them so that it's a curve. Sometimes changing the angle of the paper helps. Here I flipped it over so that I could try and make the right side even with the left side, or vice versa actually. But the problem I have is it's not. For whatever reason, I have difficulty with this. I cannot see it. I cannot just have that left side flip and be equal on the right side. So what I will do is erase. And you'll notice that I am using the brush to flip away the eraser crumbs. And I will try drawing it again. And sometimes I do this up to 10 times, and it can be frustrating. One of the things to consider is that if you are doing long hair that is going to be covering around the face, or even short hair that's going around the face, you don't always need these lines. You just need it to go up to pretty much the mouth. But I'm satisfied with this one, and now I just darken the lines a little bit so that I can see them. I also like to redo the line that I created as the bottom of the chin, because I don't want it to be a straight line. I want it to be a curved line. And so that's what I'm doing there. Again, I'm pretty darn particular, but definitely not perfect. What I have found is short strokes work for me, but you do what works for you. You can do this all in one quick line up the side of the face, or you can do it in short strokes like I do. Here I'm drawing the neck, and I align those pretty much with the center of the eyes, or to the best of my ability. And sometimes I have a long neck, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's thin, sometimes it's thicker. It really just depends on the style of girl you want. I am also drawing the shoulders here, and I am making sure that the shoulder is a little bit higher than meeting with the neckline, because I plan on having her wear a shirt. Hair. Hair is always fun. I never know what I'm going to do until I get on here and just start drawing. I decided I wanted to give her a little bit of a side swooped bang, and I drew it in and then erased what would be hidden by the hair. Sometimes I'm erasing half the face, believe it or not, but again, this is just the way I do it. What you're seeing next is little ears. I'm just throwing in some earlobes. Sometimes I do an entire ear, sometimes it's just the lobes. I generally start right around the nose. This girl is having them a little lower, just below the nose it looks like. And if I were putting in the top of the ear, I would put it between the eyebrow and the eye. But I'm just doing a little upside down U and trying to make sure they're even. They're probably not. They almost never are. But again, these are whimsical girls. We're not looking for exactness. We're looking for what you like. Here I'm drawing a necklace. I just gave myself a guideline. I started out with a heart. I didn't like it. As you will see, I will be erasing that after trying it 2 or 3 times. I decided I am going to draw a square, and maybe I can get a heart inside of it. At the necklace, and I don't just want a thin necklace. This is a pretty chunky piece that I've decided to add on, so I want to make sure it's a little thicker. I just go in and do some little quarter circles on there, and do the top, and then I'll do the bottom to make it look like it is a chain. And this will help me later when I am using my gold pen to fill in the gold and give me some guidelines. It stresses me out every single time. 90% of the time I end with hair and I don't even have something in mind. This one I decided to do a ponytail. I saw a picture, I want to say it was Brooke Shields, I forget who I saw it on, but I saw kind of a big ponytail just kind of hanging down, and it was in front, and you'll notice here that I decided to erase some of the shirt to show the hair coming up front, and that ponytail is just going to be a generic ponytail because that's what I saw, that was what was in my head. Sometimes I'll add flowers, sometimes I will add bows, hats, glasses, accessories of all kinds. But on this one, I waited until I started to draw to figure out what I was going to make, and this is what I decided on. So if you'll notice that I will draw the hair a few different times and erase it because I need to see it on the face to decide whether I like it. And I'm going to give a little bit of a side wispy bank, so I'm adding that in and making sure that I'm erasing anything that you can see underneath. On the side of her face over here so that I only have one side swept ponytail. And again, I'm making sure I erase anything that's going to be underneath the hair. I didn't like how that was too close to the ponytail. I want to make sure there's a little bit bulge. So I kept erasing until I was able to be comfortable with the bulge of hair that was attaching to that little ponytail holder. The little divot from your earlobe that goes into the center of your ear. Of course, I'm never even on these, so I just do the best I can. It's just a little up U, probably like a half U. Pretty much, she is done. She is ready for the next step before I start to watercolor. Here I am using a gum eraser, a little bit difficult to open. You want to take that piece out and you want to just start stretching it around a little bit. And I use this so that I can lighten the graphite pencil marks on my paper. Once you add your watercolor, whatever pencil marks you have made are not erasable. Well, without ruining some paper. So I just stretch it a little bit and then just start pressing it against the graphite to lighten it up. And I pretty much do the entire thing and get her ready for some watercoloring. I will add that you could use a regular eraser to do this, but what I have found is that I end up erasing unevenly or erasing too much or too little, which again I guess is unevenly. So I have resorted to using the gum eraser as my lightening technique. And now we're ready to add paint. Now I want to throw a preface in here that I am adding paint before I am adding this piece of paper to a board. I generally will tape all of my pictures to a board to be sure that my paper doesn't curl. Because I was recording, I forgot to do this. So here I am starting out with dry paper. I went in and made my skin color with a yellow and a red. Then I added just a little bit of blue to add that brown to it. So it was almost more of a pinkish red color with a slight hint of orange. And then I added some blue to, again, make it a little bit brown. This is a light-skinned girl, and skin colors range, my gosh, through the entire spectrum. So do not get stuck up like I did on your skin colors. I got stuck on them. I was like, oh, it's got to be, this needs to be blue in the skin or purple in the skin or needs to be this color in the skin. Yeah, great. Just do it on the next one. Just make as many different skin colors as you can. Every time you make a girl, change your skin color. I also am pretty flat when I do my faces. I don't try and give them major curves, and I don't highlight every single feature, but rather just kind of have a little bit of an outline and maybe a little shadowing. So right now it's just the baseline of the face and the neck, anything that is showing skin. I try to make sure I have enough of the same color so that it's the same. Otherwise, if you run out, and I have many a time, you're going to come up with a different skin color because your mixing is never the same. Here I am just going over the necklace. It doesn't matter. I can see it through this paint, and it's going to be covered by pen. So whatever color that ends up being, having the skin color on top of it does not matter. Now I'm adding some sepia or a brown color. Could be any browns that you have, and if you want to make brown, red and green together give you a nice brown. What I am doing here is creating some of the shadows. I'm just pointing it on the paint, the skin paint, while it is wet. I'm just dropping in a little bit of darker color, and the way I did it was I took the skin color and added some sepia so that it's just a little bit toned darker. And you're going to have a shadow a little bit underneath the neck. Now you have to decide where the light is coming from, and I used to do photography, so I'm very familiar with facial lighting. If you are not, I would suggest just going to look it up, and I am using Paramount lighting with a little bit of side lighting on the nose. It's a little, just because I like it that way. But Paramount lighting means that the light is directly above her head. So all of the light is going to come straight down her face. So anything that is sticking out a little bit will have a shadow underneath it. So her neck, the necklace, obviously her hairline, her nose. Now I use an embossing heat gun. I just shut off the sound for this, and I'm going to let you see just how I dry my Whimsical girls or all of my artwork, honestly. But this is the only time I'll make you watch it. I want you to see that it doesn't dry evenly. And on this face, there are some uneven marks, like around the nose and the middle of the face. And that's because of the way I lay down the watercolor. It's easily fixable, and you'll see me fixing it shortly. But I need to dry the entire thing before I can move on. Because if I were to add water now, it would interact with the color below more than I want it to. And also, watercolor also, when you put it on, is much darker than when it dries. As you see, this is very light, and because I did the highlights or the shadowing where around the hairline, you can barely see it. So it's going to have to be done again. But sometimes I don't know that until I've dried it. So I dry the whole thing, make sure, again, this is a heat embossing gun that I use. You can use a blow dryer. There's all kinds of things you can use. And look at that face. I just don't like it. But notice I forgot to tape her down, and I'm going to do that now. I'm not going to make you watch. So she's all taped down, and I hate the marks in the middle of the face. It's not even. I like a nice even skin tone. So how I fix this is I take plain water. Now in the cup next to me I have dirty water and clean water. I always have two. So I'm taking my clean water and I am just adding it to the face. And you will see that the watercolor below is going to start moving around. You can force evenness into this. I am a little bit generous with my water, and then I go around and try and do the details. You can already see that the middle of the face is better. It doesn't have that line, that dark line across it. And I am trying to add a little bit or drag a little bit of that paint around the eyes to give that a little shadowing. And then I also did it around the hairline a little bit to give that some shadowing. And notice that I'm just doing the face. I am not doing the neck yet because I am trying to outline the face. Let me tell you the importance of putting down your paper on a board and taping it. Without doing this, this is 100% cotton paper. So cotton's going to bend, it's going to expand, and it's going to bubble. So right now her face is beginning to bubble. I have made it pretty wet. I want it wet because now I'm adding her blush. I'm using the same red that I used in the skin tone, and I believe I added some sepia to this, but very, very little. I'm dropping it in. You can see every time my paintbrush touches, it gives a little circle. And I'm dragging it a little just to make some more evenness to it. But I want that to spread out on its own and for those cotton fibers and the paper to absorb the color and mix it without giving me a harsh line. That is why it is very important when you do this, even if you didn't screw up on the face, you need to make sure that the entire face is wet. Not soaking, but wet. And once you've done that, you can add additional color to it and you're not going to get harsh lines. You'll notice in some of my girls, my whimsical girls, there are harsh lines, and that was on purpose. But to not have harsh lines, you have to have wet paper. So this is called technique of wet on wet. You'll also notice that I let that red drop into the ears a little bit. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Now I'm just kind of outlining the face a little bit to make sure that I have a straight or straighter line around the face. Here I'm just adding some sepia to the skin color and using the wet on wet technique to try and add some shading underneath where the hair is going to be. I dried this with my embossing tool, my heat tool, and now I am wet on dry, and I am adding some shading underneath the chin. Again, this is skin color with some sepia and a good amount of water. I don't really like the harsh lines, so I think you're going to see me clean off my brush, go from the bottom, and there you go. I'm going to try and get rid of those harsh lines. Just kind of going to move them across there with not a dry brush, but not a soaking wet brush. I've put it against my towel to try and dry it before I put it against the paper. And then I just run along the edge of where I had the shadow, or where that line would be. But notice there's some discoloration. I don't like that. So now I'm going to have to wet it, and I'm going to have to start from the bottom and go up. Again, you can actually wet on wet technique after you've already put your paint down. That's what I'm doing here. I've already done it. And I screwed up. So I am making sure I wet the rest of it, and I usually start from the bottom. And then I go back in and I add a little more of the shading. Notice how I just kind of drop it in there? When it's wet on wet, you drop it like this. When it's wet on dry, you kind of use your paintbrush like a normal paintbrush. I'm showing you just a little bit of how I am drying. I feel the paper to see if there are any bumps or any bubbles. I don't know if a person can see, if they can actually see those bumps, or if, like me, you just can't see them ever. So I always feel the paper after I have used my embossing tool to dry to be sure that everything is dry and there are no bumps. If there are humps and bumps, you can guarantee that there is still some moisture in your paper and you need to make sure to get that all out. If you try and put wet paint on, your paint on top of wet paint, then you could not get the result that you want. So just something to think about. Here I am putting in the shadow on the eyes. I just take a very little bit of either gray or dark blue or black paint, and I have a lot of water, and I just put a little bit of like a shadow underneath where the eyelashes and eyelid is going to be. I will add a very tiny amount of red in the corner of the eye. Again, the same color that I used for the skin, so that it's not a just flat looking eye. It looks like it might have a little bit of depth. Then I put in my background. I chose pale blue, and I do this in many different ways. This technique, I am just going wet on dry, so I am grabbing just a little bit of pigment, the watercolor, a lot of water, and being pretty rough about it because I don't want an even or a perfectly even background. I want to have some texture to it. So I just go around where the hair is going to be, and then I go on the other side and do the same thing. There are times where I do wet on wet, and you have to be very quick for that. This, again, I don't want any evenness to it. I just kind of want it rough and tough. So I am going in with just one color and a little bit of water, getting that pigment laid down so that I have an outline. The reason I put the border on before I do the hair is because sometimes I have little hair pieces that will go over the border or, the background, and I obviously don't want to have to put my color on afterwards, because then it would be the background going over the hair. So just a tip, you should always try and do your background first. Here I have taken my red, and I haven't mixed it with anything. I'm going straight red this time. Put a bit of water to lighten it up a little bit. And I always do the top lip first. The top lip is generally darker than the bottom lip. So when I do this first, I can do a little bit of what's called a glazing technique, which means I go over it more than once, and it just adds more pigment to the color, to the paper, I should say. And again, I'm not very particular. I don't see well, so I do the best I can to get it into the shape that I need it to be. I'm not worried about hard lines, because there is generally a hard line here. So I am doing wet on dry. When I start the bottom lip, I generally start on the lower end, and I do it when the top lip is still slightly wet. Again, I do this so that I can have a little bit of spillover into the upper lip, because sometimes that will darken the bottom of the upper lip. And you can see how, if you zoom in, I guess, you can see how the upper lip is showing you some discolorations and not doing what I wanted it to do. So I'm adding more pigment to try and fill it in. You know, it's watercolor. It kind of has a mind of its own. I love watercolor. I'm not an expert by any means, but I have used it for a couple of years now, and I know generally what it's going to do. But sometimes I forget. Sometimes I think it's going to do one thing and it does something else. And if you can see, it definitely did not darken the lower portion of the upper lip. It darkened the upper portion of the upper lip. I'm filling the paper right now to see if it's dry. I'm checking the background, because now I'm about to go and do your shirt, and I need to have the background dry, or I'm going to have to use my embossing tool to do so. But I think it's dry, so I am mixing some orange and getting it ready to put on. Orange is a color I enjoy a lot. Orange and blue are nice complementary colors, and I do my best to stay within the lines. I do not always. You don't have to either. Again, this is a whimsical girl. This is wet on dry, and I don't want it perfect, so I'm just kind of putting it on there. It is important to make sure that when you start the other side, like I just did here, and it's connecting to another portion of watercolor that is already wet, you want to make sure you start where it's wet before that wet piece dries. This is 100% cotton, and it does dry very quickly if you are doing wet on dry. So here I am just kind of glazing, going over it again, adding a little more pigment, and being a little bit rough so that I don't have a smooth surface. I mentioned that glazing for the lips is something I would be doing, and that's what I'm doing here. I've already made sure that they are dry, and you want to make sure they are completely dry. And now I'm adding a little bit of color and making sure I'm getting the entire lip and the bottom lip. The reason I'm doing this is because, again, I don't want any harsh lines. I do want to have some dimension in the lips, but no harsh lines. So to make sure there aren't any, you got to have it all wet within that area that you're using or that you're painting. And I'm just adding more pigment and just keep trying. I'm dabbing it on, I'm spreading it around, mostly on the upper lip, knowing that because, again, this is cotton, it is going to take the pigment and bring it down a little bit wherever it is wet. So I am staying higher with my color and hoping that it drags that color down just a little bit so that it shows a nice even lip color. Putting features like the nose together. Took me a while to learn, and I just use the skin color a little darker than normal, so I might add a little more blue or a little more sepia. And I go over my pencil marks that I made for the nostrils, the little parenthesis marks, as well as a little upside down U. Then I do a little bit of shading. And if you can see, I'm following the eyebrow down to the nostril and kind of giving it a line there. And this is where I said it's not quite Paramount lighting, because I like to have that little side shadow on there as well. Paramount lighting would just be a little bit of a shadow underneath the nose. And sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. It's really personal preference. If someone is being particular, they're going to realize that I'm not using, consistent lighting. Here I'm picking up some paint off of the nose and giving it a little depth. So I want that tip to be very, very pale, and I don't want a harsh line. So if I wet it and then I use my paper towel to pick up some of that paint, you don't get the harsh line as easily. And this area right now is still wet. It's slightly damp. So you're going to have a little bit of disbursement of color. Ooh, don't forget that little thing right there. I forget what it's called, but I always put it too dark, so I pick up a little bit of the pigment with my paper towel. And that's the thing. You can easily throw a paper towel on there and pick up some pigment at any time. I'm throwing a little shadow underneath the lip, the bottom lip, because we're going to presume that it sticks out just a little bit. And now I'm doing my creases above the eye. So your little folds above the eye, you want to have those with the same color that you used for the nose. And here I am outlining my eyebrows. I will end up using a different color, but I enjoy using this color so that I can see where they're at. And sometimes I keep it. So this is showing a little bit of shadowing around the eye, just to show that there's some depth to it. You're getting a little bit of harsh lines here, and that's okay. I don't mind them. But if you don't want the harsh lines, you would need to have a wet face. You would have to wet the whole face again. And you would want to do that before you do the lips, because you would need to probably wet the lips as well. And you can't now, because then that red would spread throughout the face. But everywhere where I'm adding this color right now is shadows. I'm just trying to give you a little depth to her face. And now you're seeing a harsher line, and I love it. This is going on top of the soft line that I had done earlier, showing a little separation from the face to the ear. And I think she's getting a little bit of depth there, if you take a look. Adding a little bit underneath her chin as well, because it's darker just underneath than it is lower down on the neck. And again, that pulls her face forward. Shadows are important. I'm not someone who is the know-all on this, but I know shadows are important to see depth. And this is one of the ways I try and help identify it. I'm going into the eyes, and I don't like the sharpness or the strong line that you see, so I'm wetting the whole eye, and you can see me, I'm just scraping away that line that's in the middle of the eye. I don't want it. I didn't quite do this exactly the way I wanted to, so now I'm having to fix it. But in watercolor, you can fix things like this. This little brush here is a very stiff bristle, and if I use it very lightly on a damp piece of paper, it will scrape away some of the paint. It helps me clean up mistakes that I've made. And I'm using it right now to soften that line on the eye. The paper towel helps to pick up some of that extra water. And you can see it looks so much better now. I've chosen green green eyes, and I'm just going in and following my sketch. For the iris, dropping in some green color. I've used 3 different green colors. A deep sea green, probably hooker's green, and I'm not even sure what other one I used, but I used green to make green. Just come up with a color that you like and throw it on there. So I do both eyes. Try and do it with the same batch of green that I just created, and you'll notice that the eye on the left is darker. So I try and make them the same, and we'll go back and work on that other eye as well to just make sure that I'm using the same paint, the same values of, you know, how much water is in there, and just adding a little darkness to that other eye is going to help me out a lot. I immediately go back in, and while the eyes are drying, I try and let them dry naturally so that that color disperses nicely without too much of a hard edge. But I want to take away some of the lip color on the bottom lip, pretty much in the middle of the lip, so that I can have some type of dimension. If you notice, all I did was take a wet brush with no color on it and just started pressing it against the paper. I did not use a hard bristle brush. I used just my regular brush and just dabbed and dabbed and dabbed. Then came back with my paper towel and tried to lift up some pigment. And then I do it up on one of the corners of the upper lip as well. That's what I'm doing here, and it's just patience and generally works pretty quickly and pretty well. Here I am using black, and I am defining the nostrils. Now, I think I'm using black, but what I realized later was there is some green in here. I'm not sure if I mixed a black using colors with some green, or if I pulled the black off of my palette, but it ended up being green and I just couldn't see it at the time that I'm laying it all in there. So I'm outlining the center of the mouth, the bottom of the upper lip with green. I am outlining the the eyelid crease with green, the nostrils with green, and I will have to go back and use black to go over it. Again, it all looked black to me, so mistakes can be made and you can fix them because I am proof. Now it's time for the hair. I started this out not knowing what I wanted to do with the hair. I thought maybe I would just do brown hair or blonde hair or red hair. And then I decided, gosh, I love my rainbow hair. So I am staying with the theme of orange and looked at my color palette and said, okay, let's see if I can just start adding some different oranges, yellows, and reds to the hair in stripe fashion. And let's see what I get. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I think it's just, you know, just placing color where you see fit and using what colors you want to see in there. The only tip that I would say to be aware of is that once you have laid down some color, unless you want your colors to mix, when you put a color next to a wet color, it will mix. If you don't want it to mix, it must be dry. Use your heat gun or whatever source you're using to dry your watercolor. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I added some of the yellow that's in the hair to the top of the green in the eyes. I covered the pupil with the yellow as well, so I did the whole eye, and that was just to lighten up that green a little bit. I wanted a little more yellow eyes. Here I am using one of the colors that I used in the hair, one of the darker oranges to outline the eyebrows as well. And yeah, I kind of like that. I think I'm going to keep that as the color and probably the only color. Here's that one spot that wasn't quite dry, so I waited instead of drying it with the embossing tool. And there I am. I think I've got maybe one or two more areas to complete. I am going to also have to make sure I do this part on the head, and all I did was add a little bit of water and spread it around so that I don't have white paper there, and then pick up a little bit of the pigment with my paper towel. Of course, I made sure this was dry, and being dry is very important before I move on. Here I am realizing that the lines that I thought were black were green, and so I am trying to go over them again with black. I'm showing this to you because, first of all, I'm using green again. Not what my intention was to use black. But adding black to the little areas on the face is really important to give you that dimension, especially here in the upper lip. When you're outlining the bottom of the upper lip, you are pulling that forward a little bit, showing some dimension, and even adding the little bit of darker on the end of the lips gives that crease in our mouth, and I think that's important as well. The dreaded upper eyelid. I am using black, and I am trying to give a lash line. This is something I struggle with every single time, and just power through. It is almost impossible to remove black once that watercolor is down. So if I make a mistake, it's not moving, it's not leaving. So I make sure that I have black pigment that is not too strong, not too watery. I do the upper eyelid, I do the pupil, and sometimes I will also do some eyelashes. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself and I start seeing other things that aren't the eyes, and I start taking care of it because I'm on black. Black is close to one of the last colors that I use, and I use this for outlining, which I love to outline. You do not need to outline. I do it because I can feel a sense of accomplishment with straight edges, whereas generally my edges would be jagged if I don't throw that line in there. I used to use micron pens, and sometimes I still use micron pens for this, but today I was using my thin brush, I think it's a 0, and just some black paint. And I use lunar black because I like that dark black. Putting on just a regular black hair tie, and I'm being splotchy on purpose because I want some highlights on it. So because I'm using black, I would need to go back in with a white paint pen to add highlights, or if I'm jagged and leave some empty space, then I get my white highlights without having to use a white pen. What I'm doing now is adding some lightness to the bottom of the iris. You generally have this, if you look in the mirror, you see that if there is a light coming down from the sky, you generally have a paler bottom of your eye than you do the top of the eye. And that's also due to shadowing from your eyelid and your eyelashes. So I'm doing the same thing I did on the lips, where I am just wetting my regular brush and taking away some of that paint, using my paper towel to lift it up. And then I am wetting the rest of the eye so that there are no harsh lines. And again, I am going to miss the pupil, so I'm just doing this on the iris. I made sure everything was dry, and now I am going in to show a little depth in the ears. Not a lot, just a little darker, so that there's some depth there. Checking all the other shadowy places, as you can see with my hand jerking around a little bit. But I noticed that I needed a shadow for the hair, so yeah, I probably could have used a larger shadow, but that's what I chose to do. And then I put a little bit of a shadow in the hair as well, right along the back of the neck. Very slightly visible, but it's there. I know it's there. That's all that matters. Now I am working on the necklace, and I am putting in the shadow. So again, I'm having that light come straight down from the top, maybe a little bit over to the right-hand side, and that shadow is going to come down underneath the necklace. So I am putting that on there first. I do my pen work very last, so I could do this after I do my pen work. I choose to do it beforehand because I can see my outline there, but you do want to have a shadow or it just looks flat. I'm now adding a little bit of shadow to the bottom eyelids. It's kind of jagged, and so I always do something over here. I generally just use whatever I used for my shadows to do the bottom eyelid, though sometimes I will use black. It just depends again on the look that I'm going for. I begin to check all of my black lines around the eyes and the pupil and things like that, and then I start fixing them. Here I am doing the upper eyelid just a little thicker, adding a little bit of a swoop at the end for eyelashes. And I have various ways of doing the eyelashes. I like the swoop way, probably the best. And I'm going to do that in just a second here and just kind of drag out the black to add those eyelashes at the end. Now I am pulling up my gold Uniball medium point pen, I have gold, silver, and white. Actually, I have quite a few colors. And I use them as accents. So a lot of times I will use them for jewelry. There are paints that I have that also have metallic colors in them. Though I don't use them, they're a little more transparent, and for something like this, I like the depth that it gives me using the pen. Notice I just threw some earrings on her as well. But then I'll take out my black watercolor again and give it just a few highlights on the chain. I think I did a little bit of highlights on the earrings on the underneath, just kind of like as a shadow. And again, this just adds a little bit of depth. Nothing major, just so it's not completely flat. Now I am using my white Posca marker to add in the catch light into the eyes. And again, I want that light coming from above the head, and mine is just a little bit to the right. That gives that shadow on the side of the nose as well. So sometimes they're equal depending on how the eyes are set up and how the lids are set up. Sometimes the light is a little smaller in one eye, a little bit brighter or larger in the other eye. And pretty much this is it. She's done. I'm happy with her. I sign her. I have a signature that just says Tracy. On the back, I put my full name, the date, and the name of my girl, and this is Abigail. Thank you for watching along with me, and I hope you share yours. Have a fabulous day and enjoy your girls.